Log entry, June 6, 1944, 1742 hours, grid sector 12F, outskirts of Villers-Bocage, Normandy, France. The air was thick with cordite and rain, the kind of half-light that turns men into silhouettes and decisions into sins, the dusk hour when engines rumble like distant thunder and the war breathes heavy in the hedgerows. The voiceover would begin here, gravel and memory mixing in tone. June 1944, the Wehrmacht's Panzer elite still believed their Tigers were untouchable. Through the gray smoke and shattered orchard trees, a column of Tigers from the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion idled near a sunken road. The crew of Tiger 231 clustered around their machine, laughing, the laughter of men who had survived too long to still believe in luck but who wore arrogance like armor. Feldwebel Heinrich Kruger, the tank commander, tall and angular, leaned against the turret side, cigarette trembling slightly between oil-stained fingers, mocking the burning wrecks of Shermans smoldering a few hundred meters away. "They call these coffins tanks," he said in a rasping Berlin accent, the smoke curling around his grin. "The Americans build toys, not weapons." His loader, Otto Weiss, 21 and already hollow-eyed, laughed too, though it was thin, forced, nerves masked as camaraderie. Behind them, the air still carried the smell of scorched rubber and roasted fuel, the remnants of an ambushed U.S. armored reconnaissance troop caught in the open fields earlier that afternoon. The Shermans had come fast and in line abreast, thinking speed could outmatch armor. They died learning that it could not. The voice of the narrator cuts in again, cold, factual. For months, German tankers had seen the Allied Shermans as laughable. The Tiger's 88mm gun could destroy them at over 2 kilometers. The Sherman's 75mm, even at point-blank range, barely scratched a Tiger's frontal armor. To the Germans, it was a slaughterhouse painted olive drab. But war is a pendulum, and arrogance always pulls it back the other way. As dusk deepened, the rain came steady, thin streaks hissing off steel. Through the static on the radio, faint transmissions in broken English, intercepted Allied chatter, Eagle Red, moving up right flank, armor support inbound. The German radioman, young Dieter Koch, frowned, adjusting the receiver. "Sounds like they're regrouping," he muttered, but Kruger waved him off. "Let them. More targets for us." Yet beneath the mocking tone, fatigue gnawed at them, 3 days of fighting without proper rest, half their supply trucks lost to Jabos, and rumors of British armor massing nearby. Then, something happened that none of them could file neatly into confidence or dread. Across the hedgerows, about 700 meters away, movement flickered, low silhouettes, engines barely audible. Koch tensed. "Panzer movement?" "No," Weiss whispered, pressing binoculars to his eyes, "too small, too square." The narrator returns, slow and deliberate. It wasn't a Panther. It wasn't a Tiger. It was another Sherman, but not the same kind they'd faced before. The M4A1, 76W variant, faster, longer ranged, and carrying the new 76mm high-velocity gun that could, at close range, threaten even a Tiger's flanks. Unknown to Kruger's crew, the Americans had adapted, and they were learning. Lieutenant Jack Callahan of the 2nd Armored Division led that platoon, a man who'd buried 2 crews already since Omaha. His voice, over radio static, was calm but dry as bone. "All right boys, let's show these bastards the toys can bite." The tanks advanced using the terrain, hedgerow to hedgerow, in bounding overwatch, just as new training manuals had preached since Tunisia but rarely practiced under fire. The German optics caught flashes of movement, but range misled them. In the Normandy hedgerows, distance and death looked the same. Kruger barked an order: traverse left. Target front. Range 800. The Tiger's massive turret turned with a growling hum, hydraulic fluid leaking faintly from its joints. Weiss slammed a shell into the breech, an armor-piercing round, tungsten cord, rare and precious. The Tiger fired first. The recoil thundered through the fields, scattering birds and dirt, a white flash that carved a furrow through the hedgerow and caught the leading Sherman square in the hull. Fire erupted from its engine deck, a brief inferno, and Callahan's platoon watched their lead tank vanish in smoke. One more dead, one less friend. Yet they didn't halt. The narrator, tone tightening, adds, by 1944, the Allies had learned that standing still against tigers was suicide. Movement, coordination, and surprise were the only shields left. Callahan's remaining 2 Shermans swung wide left, using a narrow farm lane flanked by stone walls. The rain had turned the soil to muck, but the engines roared forward anyway, diesel growling like wounded beasts. Inside Tiger 231, Kruger's loader grinned again, "They're running, Herr Feldwebel." But he spoke too soon. The next sound wasn't retreat, it was the sharp, echoing crack of the American 76mm. A shot slammed into the Tiger's right side, the impact ringing through the armor like a hammer strike. Not penetration, but close. The driver, Hans Becker, hissed through his teeth. "They're closer than I thought," he shouted, but Kruger didn't answer. He was staring through his periscope, jaw tightening. The narrator's voice cuts back in, Tigers had strength, but they had blind spots, narrow vision ports, slow turret traverse, and overconfidence that made them slow to react. Another round hit, sparks showered through the turret interior. This one gouged the mantlet, nearly jamming the gun elevation gear. "Loader, AP. Schnell." Kruger roared. Weiss obeyed, hands trembling. Another American shot followed, this time, from their flank. The Tiger's armor could withstand much, but not forever. Then, through the chaos, came a moment that tore through Kruger's discipline. Over the radio, a nearby Tiger, call sign 232, screamed for help. "Engine fire. Can't traverse. They're in the hedgerows." Then static, then an explosion. Through the rain, Kruger saw it, the proud bulk of 232, its turret blown open, crew scrambling, one man aflame. "Skies," he whispered, voice cracking, as the gunner muttered a prayer under his breath. The narration softens, somber. For the first time, the German crews saw their invincible machines burn like any other. Steel, no matter how thick, still melted. Kruger slammed his fist on the turret ring, radio discipline forgotten. "All tanks, fall back to the ridge. Now." It was a breach of order, withdrawal without command authorization meant court-martial. But he didn't care. The loader stared at him, "Herr Feldwebel, command will, shut up and move." Becker shifted gears, grinding steel on steel as the Tiger reversed awkwardly through mud and fire. The Americans pressed. Callahan's Shermans advanced, hull down behind the hedgerow, taking advantage of their smaller frames. The 76mm fired again, this time striking the Tiger's rear quarter. Flames blossomed beneath the exhaust grills. The engine compartment roared like a furnace. Inside, black smoke poured through the seams. "We're hit." Becker coughed, eyes stinging. Kruger grabbed the radio, "Abandon tank." "Repeat, abandon." Another hit cut him off. The shell penetrated this time. The narrator's tone darkens, slow and relentless. In that instant, Tiger 231 ceased to be a weapon. It became a tomb. The explosion was not spectacular, just a dull, heavy bloom, a gout of black smoke and orange sparks. Kruger was thrown clear through the commander's hatch, landing in wet grass, half-conscious. When he woke, he saw Weiss still inside, screaming as flames ate through the interior. He tried to pull him free, burning his hands, breaking every regulation, every lesson drilled into him, "Stay clear of a burning tank, save yourself." But emotion had already shattered protocol. The camera of history lingers there, the German ace who mocked the Sherman crawling through fire to save a man, his face illuminated by the very thing he once believed he controlled. In the distance, the American Shermans rolled forward, cautious, their guns still trained on the smoking hulk. The narrator, quiet but cutting, they said the Shermans were weak. But war is never about machines, it's about the men inside them, and how long they keep fighting. Kruger dragged Weiss clear, collapsing beside him. The loader's eyes were glassy, his breath shallow. "You see," he whispered, blood bubbling in his throat. The toys bite hard. Kruger couldn't answer. He just watched as the American tanks passed the ridge, one of them pausing near the burning Tigers. Through the gunsight of the lead Sherman, Lieutenant Callahan watched the German crew's bodies sprawled near their wrecks. He didn't fire. The voiceover closes the sequence, mockery turns to silence when death balances the scales. The Tiger was a masterpiece of engineering. The Sherman was a masterpiece of persistence. And in Normandy, persistence won. The rain continued into night, falling over the wreckage, hissing on hot metal, washing the pride and soot into the mud, leaving behind only men, broken and the same on both sides. The rain continued into night, the sound of it drumming against twisted steel and spent shell casings, washing away the blackened streaks that once marked where armor had burned, and Kruger lay half buried in the mud, eyes barely open, listening to the slow cooling crackle of his Tiger. The world around him was reduced to noise and shadow, the hiss of steam rising from wreckage, the occasional pop of ammunition cooking off somewhere deeper in the valley, the metallic ping of contracting hull plates. The voice of the narrator folds over the image like a memory that won't fade. By 2,100 hours, the fields around Villers-Bocage were no longer a battlefield, they were a graveyard. 21 Allied tanks lost, 7 German, but for the first time, the legend of the Tiger had cracked. Kruger rolled onto his side, coughing smoke, feeling for Weiss, the loader's limp hand still clutching a wrench as if refusing to surrender the last duty he'd been given. From somewhere in the dark came distant engine sounds, not Sherman's now, but half-tracks, German medics moving through the shattered bocage, searching for survivors who could still be patched up and sent back into the fight. The documentary voice lowers, steady and grim, every army tells itself that machines can replace fear. But on nights like this, all that's left are men and what they remember. A beam of light swept across the wreckage, a medic shouted, "Here. Ein Ubrobender." Kruger felt hands under his arms, heard words that floated in and out of sense, morphine, stretcher, report. They carried him past the corpses of the other crew, past the husk of the tank that had once been invincible, and for the first time in the war he looked at a Sherman up close, its hull scarred but intact, its star insignia dulled by rain. Inside that shell, he thought, another man had been certain he was going to die. The scene fades under the narrator's calm tone. Somewhere on the same field, Lieutenant Callahan was writing coordinates into his logbook, unaware that his opposite number still breathed among the wrecks. Callahan's crew bivouacked under tarps stretched between their tanks, the rain a curtain between them and what they had done. They had been taught to hate the Tiger, the narration continues, to see it as a beast, a monster. Tonight they learned it could die, and that realization carried a weight of its own. In the faint light of a flare, Callahan took out his notebook and wrote 3 words that would never make it into the official report: they bled too. At dawn, mist rolled off the hedgerows, and the battlefield re-emerged as something quiet, almost peaceful. Kruger woke in a field dressing station, surrounded by the murmurs of other wounded, a mosaic of accents, ranks, and pain. His hands were bandaged, the skin along his forearms blistered raw. He could still hear the whine of incoming shells in his dreams, still smell the burning oil. An orderly handed him a tin mug of water and pointed toward the medical officer, who was reading through casualty sheets with a look of practiced detachment. "You're lucky," the officer said without looking up, "the others from 231 didn't make it." Kruger didn't answer, luck had become a word without meaning. Outside, through the tent flap, he could hear the distant growl of engines, new tanks being moved to the front, fresh crews still believing in armor. The narrator's tone returns, balanced between technical precision and sorrow. In late June 1944, German command still believed the Tiger battalions could hold the line. Orders came from higher headquarters to reform, rearm, and counterattack. The machines could be replaced. The men could not. Kruger was ordered back to duty within a week, his burns wrapped, his voice still hoarse from smoke. He obeyed, because that was what soldiers did, but something in him had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a silence that unsettled the younger crews now arriving from Germany, boys who called him Herr Feldwebel with awe. He said little to them. When they laughed about the Tommy Cookers, when they called the Shermans easy prey, he simply stared through them, hearing again the scream of his loader and the hiss of rain on fire. In another corner of Normandy, Callahan's unit pushed east, the Shermans grinding through mud and resistance, trading shells at ranges so close they could see the faces of the enemy through periscopes. The documentary voice overlays his march. For every Tiger destroyed, 5 Shermans burned. Yet the Allies kept coming. Production, not perfection, won wars now. The film cuts between their worlds, Kruger standing beside a newly delivered Tiger II, the Königstiger, its armor thicker, its gun longer, Callahan checking his tank's worn tracks and thinking how small his machine felt against those giants. The narrator continues, both sides were trapped in a cycle of belief, the Germans in their machines, the Allies in their numbers. Neither could yet see that war had already decided it would consume them all. Kruger's new crew didn't understand his caution. They wanted glory, kills, the fabled Panzerlied victories whispered through propaganda reels. On the morning of June 30th, his platoon rolled out toward a ridge overlooking the Kalmont sector. Kruger sat in the commander's seat, listening to the mechanical rhythm of the Maybach engine beneath him, every vibration a reminder of how fragile even this monster was. Over the radio, his gunner, Karl, hummed a tune until Kruger snapped, "Save it for after." The young man went quiet, confused, but obeyed. Ahead, reconnaissance reported Allied armor moving through the orchards, Shermans again, at least a dozen. Kruger ordered the tank into a hull-down position behind a low rise. Through his binoculars, he watched them approach, neat, disciplined, cautious. No mockery now. The voiceover cuts in with slow precision. The duel between Sherman and Tiger had become a ritual, each side measuring the other not in ideology, but in seconds of survival. Kruger's gunner lined up the first target, range 1,100 meters. Fire. The Tiger's long 88 barked, the recoil shoving the entire hull backward in a puff of dust. A Sherman flared up, turret lifting slightly from the blast. Kruger didn't even watch it burn, he was already calling out the next range. The Americans fired back, shells bouncing off the ridge, plumes of earth bursting in all directions. Through the din, Kruger could hear his heartbeat louder than the gunfire. He no longer felt invincible, only efficient, a mechanic of death counting seconds and bearings. Then a new sound entered the mix, the whoosh of rockets. Callahan's unit had called in air support. Typhoons swept low over the treetops, their engines a scream of vengeance. Kruger saw the glint of rockets before he could order reverse. The explosions came like thunderclaps, tearing open the field, flipping one of his supporting Panthers onto its side. The narrator's tone sharpens, no amount of armor could stop the sky. The battlefield had evolved beyond the reach of men inside tanks. Kruger's Tiger lurched as the concussion wave slammed it. Dust filled the turret. His driver shouted that the tracks were damaged. "We can't move." Then came another impact, close, too close. The periscope shattered, shards raining down. Through the haze, Kruger glimpsed Shermans pushing forward, firing on the move, silhouettes rising through the smoke like ghosts of his nightmares. The gunner turned to him, eyes wide, waiting for an order that never came. Kruger just stared, frozen between instinct and futility. The narrator whispers, in that moment, every legend ended the same way, with silence, fire, and the realization that no man commands war. No man commands war, only survives within its rhythm, and Kruger realized this as the next shell burst against the ridge, showering the Tiger in a rain of stones and shrapnel that rattled like hail on armor. Inside, the air was a metallic fog of oil and fear, every breath tasted of smoke. He grabbed the intercom throat mic and barked for the driver to reverse, but the right track was gone, severed clean by a rocket's blast. The Tiger lurched sideways into a crater, its turret still half-aimed toward the advancing Shermans whose guns flashed through the mist like strobe lights in a nightmare. The gunner shouted for permission to fire again, but Kruger hesitated. The range was closing too fast, and the visibility too poor. The next order would either save them or waste their last shell. "Hold fire," he said finally, voice flat. "Let them come closer." Outside, the mist glowed orange from burning fuel, and through it he could see the vague shapes of men moving, silhouettes darting between the hedgerows, infantry now, American support troops moving under the cover of their tanks. The narrator's tone overlays the scene, measured and cold. The Tiger had been built for long-range duels, for dominance across open fields. In the hedgerows of Normandy, it was a caged predator. The first Sherman crested the ridge just 30 meters away, gun barrel depressed, turret turning toward the crippled German tank. Kruger whispered to the gunner, "Now," and the 88 barked one final time, the recoil nearly dislocating his shoulder. The shot hit the Sherman dead on, the vehicle shuddered, tracks lifting, fire blooming from its hatches. But even as it burned, another took its place, and then another. The Tiger's breech jammed on the next round. Weiss would have cleared it, Kruger thought, if Weiss were still alive. "Get out," he ordered, slamming open the turret hatch. The first man to climb out was cut down instantly, rifle fire stitching across the hull. Kruger ducked back in, heart hammering. "They're too close," the driver gasped, but Kruger only nodded. "Then we wait." The narrator continues, voice like distant thunder. By the end of June, the German tankers no longer mocked their enemies. The M4 Sherman, once derided as a coffin, had become the tide itself, slow, relentless, and beyond stopping. Kruger listened to the sounds outside, the creak of metal cooling, the shouts of Americans moving through the field, and for the first time, he thought not of victory or loss but of meaning. All his life had been measured in range and armor thickness, in penetration charts and kill counts. None of it mattered now. Through a crack in the periscope, he saw a Sherman stop 20 meters away, its commander visible through the open hatch, a young man with dirt smeared across his face, scanning for movement. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and Kruger felt no hate. The narrator softens. In every war, there comes a moment when the enemy becomes a mirror. In that reflection, men see the futility of what they were told to die for. The Sherman's gun turned slowly, deliberate, until the muzzle aligned with the Tiger's turret. Kruger closed his eyes. The world went white, and the sound that followed was not an explosion but a sigh, the earth exhaling the last breath of steel and pride. When the smoke cleared, the battlefield was silent again. Only the rain returned, falling on blackened hulls that had once carried dreams of invincibility. The camera lingers over the wrecks, Tigers and Shermans lying together, their edges softened by mud. The voiceover fades in for the final time in this segment. By July, the myth of the Tiger had been undone by the very thing its crews despised, the persistence of the ordinary, the refusal of the common soldier to give up. The Tiger's roar ended not in triumph but in exhaustion, drowned by the rain of Normandy and the hum of factories an ocean away. The rain eased by midnight, thinning into mist that clung to the bocage like memory, and by dawn the battlefield was only a field again, flattened grass, burned hedgerows, the slow trickle of smoke rising into a sky that no longer cared who had lived or died beneath it. The narrator's voice returns, lower now, the cadence of a man reading from a final report. After-action summaries filed July 1, 1944 listed 5 Tigers destroyed, 17 Shermans lost. The paper numbers could never record the sound of the engines cooling, or the silence that followed. Allied engineers moved in first, cataloging wrecks for intelligence. Among the twisted hulls they found one Tiger mostly intact, its turret sheared open like a tin, its interior charred black. Inside lay 2 men, outside, half buried in the mud, another. The tags read Heinrich Kruger, SS Hauptscharführer. He had died clutching his radio handset, the cord wrapped around his burned wrist, as if trying to call someone who would never answer. The camera would linger on that detail, the cord stretched like a lifeline back into the ruins of his tank, while the narrator adds quietly, for him, the war ended not with defeat, but with the failure of everything he believed would save him. Across the field, an American maintenance crew stood beside the wrecks of their own Shermans. Lieutenant Callahan walked among them, silent, counting what was left. One of his men asked if they should paint kill rings on their guns for the Tigers they'd taken down. Callahan shook his head. "No rings," he said. Just keep them running. The narrator's tone folds over the image like wind across empty ground. That was how the Allies won, not with perfect weapons, but with ones that could keep moving. In the weeks that followed, reports of Tigers destroyed by Sherman spread through the Allied ranks like campfire stories. Each telling grew sharper, more triumphant, until the truth blurred into legend. The narrator explains, history likes its symbols neat, the mighty humbled, the underestimated triumphant. But war is never that clean. The Shermans that survived still burned men alive, the Tigers that died took towns with them. The price was always the same. Footage cuts to the factories back home, Detroit assembly lines, women welding, engines tested in the rain, while the voice continues, every Sherman rolling off those lines carried the echo of this field, proof that the mockery had ended. The toy, as the Germans called it, had outlived the monster. By autumn, the 101st Heavy Panzer Battalion was gone, its remnants folded into retreating units along the Seine. No one spoke of Kruger again except in passing. His name appeared once, in a faded notebook recovered from a field hospital, 231 lost, crew Kia. Morale shaken. That was all. The narrator slows, almost a whisper now, he had broken protocol for loyalty, for grief, for something still human in a war that had tried to erase it. In that defiance lay the last act of the German Armored Corps, not glory, not victory, but the return of conscience. The screen fades to archival footage, burned Tigers being towed away by Allied tractors, the silhouettes of Shermans rumbling forward under a gray sky. The final line of narration is deliberate, quiet enough to make the audience lean in, they mocked the Sherman until it climbed the ridge and silenced them. Not with superiority, but with persistence. In that moment, the war decided whose machines would be remembered, and whose men would be forgotten. The image freezes on the field outside Villers-Bocage, June 1944. Rain falls. Engines fade. The world turns.